Hello, Nisha here, life coach for liberatory dreamers. And that is exactly what I want to talk to you about today. So many people ask me about my journey to becoming a life coach because I am, as of today, 43 years old. And I used to be a librarian. I used to be a speech therapist. I used to be a recruiter. I used to be a consultant. I used to be a voiceover artist. I've had a lot of careers before I decided to become a coach and facilitator. So many people are like, wow, there's such different things. And honestly, it was a big insecurity for me, moving through my different careers and my different educational experiences, as well as moving through society, realizing that I've had all these different careers. And what does that mean about me that I can't figure it out or make up my mind? So please comment if you have experienced that, insecurity about not exactly knowing what you're supposed to do, right? It wasn't until I left librarianship, which was my last official career before becoming a coach, where I realized that actually all of the jobs I've had, maybe besides voiceover acting, which was honestly more of a side gig, required me to connect with other people, to understand their needs, and to accommodate them on some level. As a consultant, that's what I had to do with my clients, as well as my supervisors. As a recruiter, I had to do that in order to find jobs for different candidates and connect with the account managers about what the clients needed. As a speech therapist, it was literally my job to assess and to accommodate, to coach caregivers, and to answer their questions, as well as coordinate with different care teams, whether I worked in the schools or a hospital, etc. I worked in pretty much every setting as a speech language pathologist, which is the same thing as a speech therapist, in case you were curious. Then I was a librarian, and as a librarian, I did what's called reference and instruction, and I also was in a director role. So all of these things were front-facing roles where I had to connect with people who were my colleagues, as well as people who used the library and wanted to do research. So as a life coach, I felt very confident and seasoned to be like, I know how to ask people certain questions and how to support them. And I had wanted to become a life coach right before I went back to school for speech therapy. And this is where I want to bring in the personal, because not everything professional is just professional. I am a firm believer that the personal is professional. First of all, what we choose to do, for the most part, depending upon your situation and your context and your survival needs, will be based on something you would like to do, or at least you think you like to do. So every single job I've had, there were aspects of it I really enjoyed. So every single thing that I did had these parts that I connected with. And everyone's like, oh, you keep changing your mind, you keep doing different things. But it wasn't, right? I was always supporting people. But the thing was, society wants us to have quote unquote legitimate jobs. And I also internalized that. I internalized that message that if I was to become a life coach, who would understand that? When I wanted to become a life coach, I was about to be married and to another Indian guy, meaning he was also Indian, just like me. And I knew that he wanted kids. I deeply didn't, but I was going to be willing to assimilate to his desires, which was a red flag for sure. But that's how the relationship was. It was not a healthy relationship. And this relationship led me to being like, okay, well, I was starting to do voiceover work, but honestly, it wasn't nerdy enough for me. I really enjoyed learning and integrating information. And I was like, oh, in my undergrad, I majored in cognitive science and communication studies. I double majored, and I was like, a great integration application about that also helps people, because I was always interested in helping and supporting other people, is speech therapy, where I get to support people with their different communication needs, different disorders they might have. I always really enjoyed different stories about people who had strokes. I read Jill Boat Taylor's My Stroke of Insight. That was really fascinating to me. And until the end, actually, stroke patients were probably some of my favorite people to work with. But I definitely chose that profession too, because like I said, he wanted kids, and that was a very flexible, and still is a very flexible position to have kids. You can work in the schools and have summers off. You can work in a nursing home, just what they call registry, so as needed, a few days a week, or in a hospital, etc. And there was a lot of that flexibility. So I went back to school right after we got married, and then we, got divorced. I did not want to be married to this person anymore. And I realized that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in the roles I was in. I like to really get deeper with people, and I like to think about information critically. That brought me to librarianship, and I really found a great group of people who were thinking about it critically, which I did not find in speech therapy. Fun fact, though, within speech therapy and librarianship, they're the two highest white feminized professions. Both I think are about 88 to 90% white women. But what I saw in librarianship, I think I prioritized the level of knowledge people had. What I noticed was that people were still thinking more critically, and I met a lot of people who were looking at what was called critical librarianship. And at that point in my life, I was really getting more interested and more politicized in the ways certain populations are marginalized through racism, through patriarchy and sexism, through ableism, which I saw a lot as a speech therapist, and I actually saw a lot of harm happening at that time in speech therapy. I think things have changed, but I'm sure there's still things happening. There's a lot more acceptance around neurodivergence. There's, I was basically told to do programs where we would tell people with autism to force eye contact and to force conversation taking. And stuff like that just didn't sit well with me. Something just felt wrong about it because I was pushing them to do something that wasn't really within their capacity when, neurotypical people could just adjust to them. So this is really important because serving people who care about these issues was really important to me. And so I thought, I love helping people find information. I love being a library of something, and I thought that being an actual librarian in a library would be really cool. Yes, I do love to read, but just so you know, librarians don't just sit and read books all day. I never did that, to be quite honest. I did a lot of work working with patrons. I was a medical librarian for my career. So I worked with students. I worked with doctors and physicians at UCLA. And I also taught, and there was a lot of internal work in libraries that people don't know a lot about, that you do internal projects as well. And then I was in a director role, and I was really excited because, the reference instruction work was kind of fulfilling, but something just felt like it was missing. And what I was realizing too was that a lot of the topics I was interested in libraries, and I realized I was interested in every type of setting I worked in, was how people connected and disconnected with each other. Why was there drama in this department? Why is this person doing this to that person? How did this person react, etc. So all of these things were really of interest to me, but I never had the capacity to fully address that because I had my job to do. And while there is space, especially in academic libraries, so that means I worked at UCLA, which is considered an academic library, versus a public library, which is your neighborhood library that you go to. There wasn't that space for me to really focus on people's wellness and how they communicated with each other, etc. So that kind of brought me to a place where I realized I was ready to start something on my own. I started coaching on the side. Another passion of mine is writing. So that's also something I do, and I write memoir. I'm writing a memoir right now about my divorce, which I'm really excited about. And I just realized that is what I enjoy doing. I love to connect with people directly, and I wanted to get deeper. All of these things that I was doing were leading to, I need to get deeper. I need to get deeper. And now I am doing that. I'm able to talk to clients. I'm able to talk about how systems of oppression, systems of control, like capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, ableism, classism, how this impacts our wellness and our capacity to heal, as well as what are the ways it impacts us and how do we also have agency? And how do our choices and the actions we take and the energy that we give and offer to the world, how does that impact everyone else? Because we live in an interdependent world. A lot of my work is around not just interdependence, but earthly interdependence. We are part of the earth, just like the ants are, just like flowers are, just like trees are. And what does that mean? If I am a part of this earth and I am connected to a tree, and me and the tree are both manifestations of what can exist on the earth. What does that mean for the choices I make in my life, for how I regard other humans in relationship, how I regard other non-human forms of life? What is my relationship with them? And in what way can it be generative? Because the earth and nature are generative. And are there like things like predators and harmful things like viruses, which are also forms of life? Yes, absolutely. And I'm not here to disregard that, but I also think that the different choices that we make personally, as well as how systems have made choices by extracting from the earth for fossil fuels, you know, development, real estate development that has no regard for one, people who have lived in a certain area for a really long time, the ways that colonial powers have displaced indigenous peoples and, made them assimilate to the dominant ideology through boarding schools, through disconnecting them from their ways of knowing by replacing their epistemologies with Western ways of knowing, which also is a really interesting connection with librarianship and knowledge systems, I thought. But that's really what got me to where I am. So I do one-on-one coaching with folks. I also have group programs. At the time of this recording, I'm about to start a really amazing program that combines writing and healing called Writing to Heal from Extractive Systems. I'll drop a link down in the notes there if you want to see the information. And I do a lot of my writing. I'm writing my memoir, and I write in my newsletter, which I'll also link in the stories. You should really subscribe if you resonate with what I'm saying and you want to connect more. My email list is the one thing I own, and I always encourage people to subscribe to that. And I still actually do work with libraries. I do a lot of facilitation work about what it means to be trauma-informed in libraries. And a lot of people will think like, oh, libraries, they're such safe spaces, they're so neutral. And that's a big myth of libraries, that there's neutrality there, because we must think about, as I mentioned, knowledge systems being manifestations of Western dominant ideologies, and how that might show up in Western spaces like higher education that prioritize those ways of knowing. How is that represented in information and research, in the ways we write, the ways we share information? Whose voices are we centering? How are we regarding like oral histories as opposed to writing being the written word being the only authority, which if you look at Tema Okun's white supremacy culture characteristics, worship with written word is one of them, right? So just some things to think about, for how all of this is connected, which is why I love that I get to stay connected with libraries and talk about this work through the lens of wellness and what it means to be trauma informed and cultivate safety within library spaces, not just for patrons, but with each other, because there's a lot of internal things that happen in an organization, just like it happens in any organization. If you're familiar with a lot of the challenges in academia, it shows up in library spaces and academic libraries. And it also shows up in public library spaces, museums, etc. If you think about museums, they extract, other people's items and put them in museums, which is also an issue. So all of these things are parts that I integrate, all the aspects of my career, the ableism that I witnessed as a speech therapist, while also thinking about, okay, how can I support this person? How can I help them feel fulfilled and successful, not in a way where they feel like they need to be successful in the eyes of dominant powers, but what makes them feel intrinsically successful in a way where they could show up in the world that feels good, but also regards other parts of life in this world. So one question I always ask is like, who is life asking you to be? And that is a very deep question that requires you to undo all of the conditioning that you've had. Understand whose voices are informing your desires, and your anger and your people pleasing. So this is how I became a life coach. This is my story about how I became a life coach, and I absolutely love what I do. I love that I can connect everything that brings me joy with other people, because that interdependence is so important. I thought about being like a full-time writer, but I realized that, it could be kind of isolating, and I really really feel like I need to share more with others and make this a connected experience and a community experience where we can be mirrors for each other and expand upon each other's perspectives so that we can increase our understanding of ourselves and of the world. So I hope this was supportive. Drop your questions in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And feel free to check out the links in the comment section as well. Bye.